Nebraska State Senator Dan McKeon is facing a showdown with political history. Good evening, I'm Brian Mastry.
And I'm Erin Sullivan. The legislature is set to vote on if McKeon should lose his job over an allegation of inappropriately touching a staffer, among other reports of unprofessional behavior. As our John Chapman reports, he could become the first senator in state history to get expelled.
Nebraska Senator Dan McKeon on the political hot seat, accused of violating several workplace harassment policies.
These findings indicate a pattern of improper behavior and lack of accountability that is unbecoming of a member of the Nebraska Legislature. This conduct has brought this institution into disrespect and disrepute, shaken the confidence of fellow senators in his ability to adhere to senatorial traditions of decorum.
Senator McKeon is facing the possibility of being expelled from the legislature. The senator's attorney believes that's going too far.
Expulsion is not simply discipline. It is the legislature nullifying an election and removing a representative chosen by the voters of Legislative District 41.
McKeon's attorney, Perry Persh, told the committee over the years there have been senators who have committed more serious offenses.
I can tell you that there are repeatedly throughout the years known instances of senators having illicit relationships with their staffers and receiving gifts, doing other things that I would characterize as far more serious.
But the executive board believes the senator has demonstrated a pattern of behavior, even if his attorney has contested the facts. Committee members also referred to a news release issued by Senator McKeon, alluding that he was a victim of political correctness and cancel culture.
Do you believe that the actions of the exec board is the result of political correctness and cancel culture?
I believe absolutely that this is a political body and that the actions of the body reflect the political climate and concern of politics, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Persh.
Reporting from Omaha, I'm John Chapman, First Alert 6.
The full legislature is scheduled to vote on Senator McKeon's future tomorrow.